مشاهدينا مرحبا بكم في حوارات السياق. جاء في مقال لصحيفة آسيا تايمز أنه بين 195 دولة في العالم التزم 30 منها فقط بالعقوبات الأمريكية على روسيا، حيث ذهب كاتب المقال إلى الجزم بأن غالبية دول العالم تقف إلى جانب روسيا في حربها على أوكرانيا. عموما للمزيد من المتابعة حول هذا الملف ينضم إلينا كاتب المقال جون والش. أستاذ جون مرحبا بك معنا.
You're very welcome. Glad to be here.
غالبية دول العالم إذن تقف إلى جانب روسيا في حربها على أوكرانيا بحسب ما جاء في مقالك، كيف وصلت لهذه النتيجة؟
One can judge that in a variety of ways. I think the most important way is to judge it based on how many countries and which countries supported the US sanctions on Russia. And it turns out a majority of countries in the world do not support it. The overwhelming majority, I think the countries representing 80% or 80-some% of the world's populations do not support it. And among those countries, if we take the top 10 economic powers by PPP GDP, 5 do not support it. So I would say, if you look at it, yes, the United States has the support of the Anglosphere and Western Europe, but that's not the world. And so I would say in the world, the United States is isolated on this issue. And I would also say that that's a failure, that the nations that are refusing to join the sanctions or boycotts are nations, many of them, of the global South. And the global South is no longer poor. It's a rising, dynamic part of the world. And I don't think the United States understands that.
ذكرت أن 30 دولة فقط التزمت أو امتثلت للعقوبات الغربية على روسيا. ما الأسباب باعتقادك؟
Well, I think, I can't tell you that entirely. I think certainly economic interests play a big role. Let's take the example of, we could take various examples. China is a close friend of Russia. It doesn't support the sanctions. India forged strong relations with the Russia during the Soviet era, when the Soviets, whatever else you may think of them, were strong backers of the anti-colonial movements. And I think other nations around the world look at the United States and wonder how reliable and a friend it can be. Henry Kissinger has once said, supposedly, he said, to be an enemy of the United States can be dangerous. To be a friend can be fatal. And I think people are looking at that, and they see what has happened in Afghanistan and what has happened elsewhere to US friends, or to the Kurds for that matter, and they get used up and left. And so I think that plays a role in it too.
هل الدول الحيادية من هذه الحرب هل تعدها داعمة لروسيا؟
Yes. The thing is this, that I think most countries are in fact, it depends on how you decide neutrality. And I think you can decide by various means. You could decide on the basis of a UN vote, for example. But there is a book called The Great Convergence by Kishore Mahbubani, who was the UN representative to the Singaporean representative to the UN for a long while, and also I believe chaired the Security Council for a while. And he points out in his book that through pressure, coercion, bribery, and so on, that UN votes can be concocted, can be engineered. So I don't think that's a very reliable measure. I think the reliable measure is in the real world, where people have to put their money where their mouth is, to use an American expression. So that's the metric that I think is the very most important.
ماذا عن الصين والهند؟ كيف يمكن تقييم مواقف هذه الدول حتى الآن من الحرب؟
Oh, I think that they are, I would say in the case of those two countries, they are actually supportive of Russia's position. I think deep down they know that this war is a proxy war, that the United States has been working to gin up this war for a long time. And it begins in earnest with the coup in 2014 in Ukraine, which was engineered, supported by the United States, carried out to an important degree by neo-Nazi elements, not exclusively, but they were in the lead and they are still an important factor in the government. So I think they see this war as something that Russia was forced into, and that it reached a point where it felt, you could say, that it was wrong. It had no choice but to respond. And this is all built around the push of NATO to the east. I mean, the United States and its allies gave their word, and this is recorded over and over again, when the Warsaw Pact was dismantled, that NATO would not move, quote, 1 inch to the east. Beginning with the Clinton administration, it moved steadily to the east until it found itself on Russia's doorstep. And since at least 2007, Putin has been complaining about this, begging the United States and NATO not to, I mean, I think literally begging. And he did that from 2007 to 2022. And I think that the last straw was the shelling of the Donbass region, which has Russian speakers, very sympathetic to Russia. 14,000 people were killed there between 2015 and 2022. I think that was hard for. I don't think Russia, the Russian population, could ignore that any longer. So you could disagree whether Putin was wise in what he did by crossing the border. I don't think you could, after the shelling of the Donbass, I don't think you could argue that he fired the first shot.
هل يمكن لهذه الدول المجتمعة الاستقلال عن النظام التجاري الغربي الذي يهيمن عليه الدولار؟
I think there's a developing independence of the world. I think that that's seen, and of course the main thing, as you well know, is the main thing is the strength of the dollar and the power that the dollar has over the world economy. That's a large part of the way the United States engineers these sanctions. That already there is an exchange between Russia and China in rubles for renminbi. That cuts the dollar out. Now there's an exchange in the works between India and Russia for rubles and rupees. So you have rubles, rupees, and renminbi, 3 big currencies, not giant like the United States, but really consequential, working their way towards an agreement that's outside the dollar. And that in turn leads to a multipolar world. I think that kind of a world, not a unipolar world, but a multipolar world, would be much more peaceful and much more prosperous. And we wouldn't have all these wars that we've been living through for the last 20 years, most of them in your region of the world, in the greater Middle East.
ماذا عن دول الخليج؟ هي أيضا فضلت الحياد ولم تستجب للضغوط الأمريكية فيما يتعلق بأسواق النفط.
And as a matter of fact, that is another, frankly, when India refused to go along with the sanctions, I was a bit surprised because great pressure was brought there. And also in the countries you mentioned, great surprise. I think this has been, and also in other places, United States tried to get Iran and Venezuela to pump more oil. And in Venezuela, you know, the United States declared that Maduro was not the president, that, that somebody else was. And they had to go back on that and go say, well, we've decided after all, President Maduro, that you are president. Now, please pump some more oil. And he did not respond well to that.
في مقالك حملت أوكرانيا والولايات المتحدة مسؤولية اندلاع الحرب واستمرارها. كيف يستقيم ذلك؟ أليست أوكرانيا المعتدى عليها هنا؟
I do. I think that Zelensky is basically not his own man. He has to respond to the pressure of the United States and also to the pressure of the neo-Nazis groups in his country, who I believe at one point have threatened to kill him if he doesn't do the proper thing. So, you know, he is basically now a puppet of the United States and the United States. That's why this is a proxy war between the United States and Russia, as Ron Paul, an American politician, said, a proxy war to the last Ukrainian. And it's a cruel proxy war in that way because the Ukrainians are being cynically used. It should stop. And we in the United States have a big responsibility to try to stop it because it's our government. And that is very difficult because there are people in charge of our foreign policy who are very belligerent, very bellicose, neoconservatives.
طيب إذا بنينا على كلامك، هؤلاء هم من يقودون الحرب في الولايات المتحدة. ماذا عن أوروبا؟
This is a hard thing for me to understand. Certainly, the people in the two areas of contention in the world, in the Europe and in the Far East, the countries in between, caught between the United States and Russia on the one hand, and the United States and China on the other hand, those countries in between are in a position also to stop all this because the United States can't go it alone. The American people don't like to, they might agree to have other people fight their wars, but they do not like to fight their wars themselves. So so the people of Europe could stop this, but they're not. Now, to some degree, the United States has enormous influence over Europe. Germany, after all, the main country, is an occupied country. An occupied country with tens of thousands of American troops is not an independent country. It's not a sovereign country. Just as Japan is not a sovereign country, just as South Korea is not a sovereign country. And you know...
أعذرني على المقاطعة، أفهم من كلامك أن أي دولة لها قاعدة أمريكية هي دولة فاقدة للسيادة باعتقادك؟
I do not believe that you can call it a sovereign country. I don't know any sovereign country with a choice that would leave foreign troops on its soil. They might have a security pact, but permanent presence since the end of the Second World War or the end of the Korean War, that's a little, you know, the Secretary of State warned the world. He said, watch out for inviting Russian troops when they come in. They tend not to go home. Well, I guess he forgot about Germany and Japan and South Korea and all the other places.
هل بات العالم أمام نظام عالمي جديد متعدد الأقطاب يعاد تشكيله؟
Yes. Again, we live in a unipolar world. At least we are leaving a unipolar world, which has been filled with wars and strife, and actually not the level of development that we could see in a peaceful world. So to get there, I think we have to have a multipolar world with no country calling the shots, no country dictating to all others. And what we will do and how we will structure that multipolar world to be one of peace and prosperity is up to us. I think at the beginning, the UN will play a key role in that, but the UN has to evolve too. It doesn't reflect the Security Council and other parts of the UN don't represent the new reality in the world. So that's up to us. That's up to humanity. The world is not, our future is not written somewhere in some book. We will have to make it, but we will have to make it to begin with in this new multipolar world. And that's irresistible. That's going to happen.
تعتقد مع مرور الوقت واستمرار الحرب واستنزافها لاقتصاديات دول كثيرة، هل ستبقي أوروبا على دعمها لهذه الحرب؟
I don't know. I know that it's in their interest to look out for their own self-interest rather than that of the United States. The inflation there, of course, is going to take a tremendous toll and is going to cause a lot of turmoil and questioning of the war. Germany especially, again, is the key. And I think were it not for the German Greens, who turn out to be enormously hawkish, that Germany might be going the other way and be calling for a more peaceful, negotiated outcome to this whole thing. But not only the United States has a tremendous hold on Europe and has managed to recast this proxy war in terms of a fight for freedom and democracy. That's not what it is. It's a fight for US domination. And I think the Europeans have bought into the former narrative, not the latter. They have to wake up and see the real world. Whether they can do that, I would hope they would, because that would put an end to this conflict.
هي السردية نفسها التي تتبناها الكثير من وسائل الإعلام حول العالم. كيف تفسر ذلك؟
I agree that the Western media is dominated to an extraordinary degree by the US. And I think that has been engineered since the end of World War II. I think the United States, I'm not an expert on this, but it paid very much attention to the as Noam Chomsky calls it, to the manufacture of consent by constructing its narratives and making sure that every place where the United States had influence would follow that narrative. Well, that narrative is also crumbling a little bit. And I don't know how in Europe it seems to be pretty solid right now, but we could be surprised. German industrialists, for example, are very unhappy with the state of things. Some people think that the German economy will be wrecked and maybe permanently by by the sanctions and the failure of Germany to get Russian petroleum. So under that pressure, I think under the pressure of that, the Germans might start to shift. We'll have to see. I wish they would.
شكرا جون والش للمشاركة معنا في حوارات السياق.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to be here.
مشاهدينا شكرا على طيب المتابعة. إلى الملتقى.